Canadian behavior has changed, or how the Canadian customs behavior changed because of the COVID-19. So let us start. The very close but long distant country. Why? It's very distant country from us. It's located in the different hemisphere, in the different continents, and there's a lot of questions with the logistics now. But Canada is still a very close country to us because, like, it's our sister country. And on the second hand, on the other hand, that that there's a lot of people from the Ukraine living in Canada. There's a lot of diaspora living there, so they have special connections with the country. So I'm not why the things I want to tell you about Canada, not because I want to update your knowledge on geography, but because there are geographical significance of the country really influences on how you trade with Canada. Well, first of all, you know that this country is about 10 million square kilometers, but overall on this huge territory, there's only 37 million of people. 80% of the 37 million of Canadians, they live around 160 kilometers above the kilometers of the US. And the other 10%, they live in two provinces, in Ontario provinces and in the Quebec province. And also the administrative situation in Canada is very different because it's federative, and every province, it's basically, they have their own mandate on regulating the trade regimes. Even the trade between the provinces was quite difficult because the demands of one province that might be different than the demands of the other province or territory. We have to say that, for example, the very same system of the rules and labeling is going to be different. For example, Quebec, the only French-speaking province, when they have the so-called continental system of the rules that's also available in Ukraine. In all of the other provinces, they're only working with the Anglo-Saxon law. And the very same thing when you're going to be conducting a contract and closing the agreements with your partners, like you cannot say that all of the disputes will be resolved under the law of Canada. Why? Because in Canada there is the law with a separate province, the one that is used for any disputes. It's the very same thing. If you will learn how to deal with Canada and businesses, then you will be working with the whole of the world. Why? Because every fifth Canadian has been born outside Canada. More than a half of all of the Canadians have been born abroad. They are coming from the Southeastern Asia, and 1/3 are coming from Europe. What can be the situation? That you can be negotiating, for example, with all of the 5 continents, like one person coming from India, the other person coming from China, the third person coming from Indonesia or Philippines. The third person will be the representative of Europe, so basically expatriate from Europe. So basically they have to consider a lot of cultural peculiarities and significances that you have to consider. But I believe if you will learn to trade with Canada, then you will learn to deal with all of the world. We have around like 11 million of Ukrainians, the big diaspora. I would like to tell you from our experiences, those are basically the people, not the people who go into will help you to trade or will be our agents. No, but it's really important that a huge Ukrainian diaspora makes very close and warm connections between Canada and Ukraine. Understanding that Ukraine is a separate country and the specific role of products that are coming from Ukraine is very good. So they have slightly preferential treatments as the population for the Ukrainian goods. So this is one important big plus for us, just to take a look at the Canadian direction of our export. If I will speak about the issues of the trade modes, then I would like to tell you that the quote of the free trade agreement, and our agreement has been conducted on 2017. It gives additional perspectives for the producers of Ukrainian products. And I would like to offer you to take a look at a couple of figures. And in this slide, you can see the significant differences that had before the agreement before the agreements and after that. So you can see, like, for example, speaking about jams, fruit jellies, marmalades, and fruit or nut puree, and you can see that there is some limitations for the countries that don't have the FTAs. There is the tariff of 6.5, but what is interesting for us is the final column. This is the preferential treatments, and this is important for us because we are having the UAT. The UAT is actually the tariff for the goods of Ukrainian origin, so it's free of charge. So it means that basically the Ukrainian goods, they're not going to be they are exported without paying the customs tariffs. And in a couple of slides, you will see in a couple of slides, you will see the link for the most updated legislation of Canada, and you will check what are the conditions for trade with Canada for Ukraine also. Let us take a look for a different types of goods. For example, the very same jams, marmalades, and jellies that made out of citruses. You can see there was 8.5 tariffs, but for Ukrainian goods, there is no tariffs for that. Strawberry jam, there was 12.5% of the customs tariff. In the theory of international trade, so basically every tariff that is higher than 5% can potentially close the access to markets. So you can see that UAT, it says free, it means that those are conditions of the preferential trade that is going to be really helping Ukrainian producers to find a niche in the Canadian markets. But not not for all of those products it can be good. If we'll take a look at two different types of goods, for example, natural honey or the fertilizers of animal or vegetable origins, you can see that under both the free trade agreement and as well as an MFN tariff, it's just the same. It's free. There's no tariff, no customs tariff there. It means that the free trade agreement hasn't changed the conditions for the trade for these goods, but there's also the good news that the producers of those goods, they should not read out to the specific origin rules, and they should just analyze whether your goods has been achieved at your origins rule in the right way. So at the next slides, you will also see the links for the regulations of Canada. That's very easy to work with. It's always constantly updated, and you'll be able to see there is like what is the trade mode that currently exists for your specific good. As I already said, the rules of origins. The rules of origins is a very complex issue. There's a very complex rules that apply there. It's really going to be hard to speak about that in half an hour, but as every free trade agreement, there are very specific lists of what are the products, what the products needs to have, the rules of origin that make the product Ukrainian. Those rules there have been identified in Article number 3 of the Free Trade Agreement, but I would like to say that we've simplified the life for Ukrainian exporters. We have prepared a separate publication. It can be accessed free on our site. Those are the origins, the publications about the origins. Those that covers all of the rules and explains you with the specific cases. And I do believe that after you will know about these publications, you will get acquainted with this publication. You will have no questions about how to use those rules. We have prepared these publications because the origin rules, there are slightly different than, for example, the rules of origins in the agreements with our European colleagues, with the European Union. There are quite different than the association agreement because they are built on the American tradition. So that is why there's some additional explanations that might not be clear. Then once again, authentications of the origins. If you would like to have the zero tariff for the income customs, you will have to provide the declarations of origins. This is the document that the exporter creates. There's no need to go to any kind of outside organizations to receive that. And you know that in some like trades, you should have the Euro 1 certificate. Now you don't have to do that. The exporter reads out the rules of origins, then you understand that the goods have the Ukrainian origins, and they sign the declaration. There is the template of the declarations in our publication also, and you can just sign these declarations in, for example, invoice or any other documents that describes the goods, the products. The tariff quote. The tariff quote, we also have to mention that. Why? Because there is some kind of misunderstanding, especially for the producers who have been working with European countries, and they believe that the tariff quotes are the one that have like specific like like the quotas that have been delegated specifically for Ukraine. No. In Canadian case, no, the tariff quotas of Canada, it means that those quotas, they are built on the competitive grade. So the producers from all over the world, they compete to fulfill those quotas, and they are changing on the annual basis. There is the good news that the right to receive the quota is built for Canadian importers. So the exporters of any other country for all over the world, they have no administrative rights to participate in those domestic Canadian competitions and to be trading in the framework of Canadian quotas. So right now, under the list of this, what we're mostly interested about the wheat, about barley, about wheat and barley itself and the products made out of it. But let us take a look about the tariffs of Canada. At this very site, and you will see there are the different tariffs that are applicable to wheat. You can see that, like, for example, the seed wheat. When you will see that when there is one product, but there is the differentiation between two different, like for example, in-access commitment or over-access commitment, it means that the good is under the quotas, under the tariff quotas. Take a look at here, the M&F tariffs are, as the English people say, they're exorbitant. So it's not 49%. That's not just high, it's terrible high. You will never be able to be competitive in the market with that. But once again, what was interesting for us, again, applicable preferential tariffs, what is interesting for it. And now we see that the goods of Ukrainian origins in the framework of quota, even over the quota, we have the free tariff. This is an exception that Ukraine has really managed to get throughout the negotiation process. That is the big victory for us, because for a lot of products, especially in Group 10, then the existence of the tariff quotas is irrelevant when you're going to over the quota, because right now we can export in both the quota line and after that. So non-tariff barriers and non-tariff regulations. That is a very complicated and simple situation at the same time. There is a very interesting resource that at the Canadian food quality control, they have. This is basically the analog of our food services. It's basically SAT, the automated import requesting system. This is the system that really looks like the system in the European Union, but the system has been developed specifically for the Canadian buyers. So it doesn't mean that, like, for example, the Ukrainian exporters, they can also use this resource, and in order to learn about some new requests for your goods, and first of all, whether it is not forbidden to trade it in Canada. The system is very easy. Then you can enter the code of your good. By the way, please pay attention that the classifications of the goods on the level of 10 digits that might be different than you will have in Ukraine. So that is why please pay attention to the description of the goods. If you will not find your 10 digits code of your goods, then you have to choose the region of origins, that's Europe. Then you will have to choose country, that's Ukraine. Then we're choosing the human consumption level. Why? Because, like, this is our word, have the organic goods. It means that the main aim is to consume the products. And then the system will generate you a couple of important moments. First of all, there's going to be recommendations for the Canadian Customs, which is the Canadian Border Reception Agency. And this is what is more important, that you have, if they allow you, if they're like the special sanitary norms, then everything is valid, they acknowledge, so you can trade as good with Canada. Like, then there will be some important conditions, but there's going to be additional references in the end. The additional references, this is the very important thing that you have to read through, because here there are some additional requests on those norms and regulations, the federal regulations, not provincial, but federal regulations, with the specific clarifications, for example, for the province. But here you will have those norms and regulations on the federal level. For example, for the leftovers of the pesticides, on how you mark the allergens, what are the practices that has to be identified on the labeling, on what are the practices that are certified at the production. So this is going to be the most of all the guide that you will have to get acquainted with on what is requested from your product, how can you retrieve the permission to trade it. But there also can be some bad exemptions when our goods cannot be imported to Canada. Remember, we have mentioned that for Group 10, that there is really good preferential conditions for trade, like even despite the quotas, that we can trade it for free. But as we move forward and as we see the conditions for this good with the system, that with air system, then what we see that there is the refused entry. It means that the goods cannot be basically and cannot be imported to Canada. It means you can see that it is prohibited entry by the Plant Health and Production Division. It means basically that Canada does not authorize our sanitary legislations. From our side, we've also tried to get acquainted what is the reason for this prohibition, and we said that many years ago they have been the seeds that have been important with some kind of with some kind that hasn't been treated in the right way, and this category of goods has lost the trust. Well, I would like to say that it doesn't mean that it will actually last forever, that this prohibition will last forever, but we can take it down depending on the further on negotiations between our two corresponding services. But what would have to be there have to be the proactive position of the businesses, because you can imagine that like the two bodies have their own interests and they have dealing with a lot of products, especially if we're speaking about dairy and meats, then the proactive position of the businesses and making your voice heard that you should open this market, that we have a lot of prospects on exporting that, we would like to export, it will help you to facilitate the process of taking down this prohibition. There's very good communication between the Canadian service and Ukrainian services. They are in constant dialogue, but what is needed, we need to have the proactive position from the businesses so that we will have, let us say, the main foundations of why these limitations and these prohibitions should be taken down. So that we need to make sure that in this column for the recommendation from the BSA to have the approve button, so we could do that. And quite recently to this AIRS system, they incorporated the provisions on the organic goods. Right now, that's only available for honey, for fruits and vegetables. And what does it mean for us? It means that when you enter the specific title of the goods, it will give you basically the choice whether you would like to learn about the organic honey or the simple honey. If you will choose the organic honey, for example, among the recommendations, you will read out that you will need to provide the organic certificate, and you will have to also provide the safe food of the Canadian for the Canadian license. And out of the 2019 15th of January, there is the new legislation in Canada that is corresponding with the regulations on the food markets. For more than a year and a half, imports and exports and inter-province trade of the food products has to be licensed by the Canadian body. It means that the Canadian importer, they have to have the license. The license is being provided for 2 years, as far as I remember, and it will cost you around 250 Canadian dollars, which is not a huge amount of money for Canadian importers. Then the license is provided to Canadian importers, so the Ukrainian exporter should not worry about that, but we will have to provide the certificate of origins. When you are going to be dealing in negotiations with your counteragents, then you will have to ask them whether they have the license for the food products input, so there will be no additional problems later on. Because the organic certificate, it has to be provided by the exporter, but the importing license have to be provided by the Canadian importer, your counterpart. And another additional condition, there is some additional requirements from the Canadian importers on this control. So the Canadian importers, they need to provide the full information about the producers of this good in the third country, and they have to be available to trace the goods on every step of the supply chain. Requests to labeling, requirements to labeling, like, I only have 5 or 7 minutes to do that, but I actually can cover it in 3 or 4 hours, but I will try to be very, very brief about the main requirements for the products market. Someone decided to share their own screen, and now you cannot see my presentation. Salima, let's keep this. Can you turn off your presentation? Thank you. Okay, now it's going to be that. Okay, at this very slide, you can now see those requests lists, that's information that has to be fed into the label. And this, we will take a look into details about that. So what is the common name? The common name is basically the common name that is the name that is the title that the good is known for the consumer. But according to the regulations, some of the goods, they are standardized. What does that mean? That means that, for example, according to the Declaration on Food Products, it has the very detailed descriptions of what is the content of the specific good. For example, chocolate. Chocolate is a standardized good in Canada, which means that there are quite clear requests on requirements on how many cocoa should be included into chocolate, and only those goods who correspond to the requirements can be called chocolate. All of the other will be the chocolate products. There are not many goods that are standardized in Canada, but you have to pay this attention to that. You have to read out on those declarations on the food products. If, for example, your product does not fall under the standardized requirement, then the common name for you, this is the name that your product is known to your consumers. The minimal height of the typeface has to be at least 1.6 millimeters. And of course, you have to understand that all of the labeling in Canada is done in 2 languages, in English and French. So you have to have your title, your common name in English and French, and you cannot give preferences. You cannot give preferences to one language. Like, for example, you cannot make all of the labeling, all of the packaging in English, and then below to make the very same in French. No, it has to be equal. I would like to tell you from our experience that even sometimes the people from the Quebec province, and this is the French-speaking province, if you remember, they're always really offended if, for example, in French, that if, for example, the French translation is inadequate, if it's done with mistakes. And he lives in Ottawa, but he says, like, when I'm reading the packaging, I'm always reading the French translation, and if it's bad, then I'm not buying the product. So you cannot be preferential treatment to any of the languages. You have to be equal, so it has to be very good text, both in English and French. The net quantity, that's quite easy. We're not going to pay additional attention to that, whether it's liquid, whether there's any kind of other substance. You have to measure it in liters, milliliters, in grams and kilograms. And once again, the minimum typeface height is 1.6 millimeters. Then there's an interesting moment, the name and the principal place of businesses. Well, once again, you can provide it in English, but there is an interesting moment for that. If the good has been fully produced outside of Canada, it means that it's imported, and you have to say that imported by or imported for. Who was the main importer, or for on whose order that was. For example, take a look at the nuts. For example, if peanuts have been imported to Canada, but in Canada it has been roasted, salted, and packed, then the product will be considered Canadian, but you have to only mean the main address of the producer. But if you fried and salted these peanuts in another country, but you have got it to Canada and only packed it in Canada, you have to put the import by or import for labeling, and you have to identify the country of origins. The due date, durable life date, store due date. So it's important that the due date for the products, you have 190 days. So you have to mark the durable life date. In the instructions for the preservation of the goods, for example, the instruction on the storage instructions, they only be identified if it's going to be different than the usual room temperature. Please pay attention that the best before date is in the different order. So not the one we used to. You do the year, then you do months, and then you do date. And there is a special abbreviation for the months, so that we would not use numbers, for example, like in French and English, there is the standardized abbreviation. And in this example, you can see there's DE, which means December. And please pay attention to that too, because sometimes there is for the storage instructions, then you can add some additional information, for example, so you can freeze it by that date, or there is some additional instructions on storing this good. But, well, basically you can only get to mark that if that's a very important information for the customer and if it's not going to be misleading for your clients. The ingredients list, the list of ingredients, that also has to be in 2 languages, and the ingredients, the components, they have to be identified in the order of the amount of it. So with the highest composition starts the first. And what is the most important thing? You cannot play with the typeface. You cannot play with types. You cannot make it, for example, in bold, like you can see on this example, that you cannot use the bold typeface, or you cannot use any kind of italic. You can just, everything has to be done in one. Another important thing is that the allergens in Canadian services under food control, they pay additional attention to the right markings of the allergens, and we're going to be talking about the call-out or processes of the products, and I'm going to give you the examples of how the allergen haven't been marked the proper way. There are 2 ways of how you can mark them. Like, first of all, when you mark them in the ingredients lists, then you can do that a special color. Like in the end, you say it contains sweet egg milk that make it ingredient. The main allergens, I do believe that you're already aware of what those are. There's the peanuts, the nuts, the wheat, sulfates, the tree nuts. Then you can see that those allergens, they have been marked in red. But this is specifically only for our presentation. You remember that in the ingredients list, there cannot be any additional markings or additional colors. I will leave the slide specifically for you. Those are the links on the list of the useful information sites for the list of allergens, for the leftovers of pesticides, on vitaminization. It would be very important for you. I do hope that it will be very important for you if you will need the resources to find the information. Nutrition facts table, very interesting. There's all the detailed requirements on how you can identify your nutrition levels. That's also been identified in English and French, and this information has to be on one whole over surface. You know, it cannot be changed. It cannot be changed because of the shape of the packaging. So you can see all of those. You can see all of those examples. They are wrong. So once again, this is wrong. That is not going to be approved by the Canadian Foods Agency. So once again, you will have to read out through all of the requirements for the labeling and packaging. You can see this is the good example of how this nutrition facts table has to be organized, what it should look like. Please pay attention that the nutrition fact is not for 100 grams of good, but depending on the portion, and the nutrition fact is provided in percents from the everyday norm of consumption. This norm has been provided by the Canadian organizations. And I would like to say that our publications, this like pink book on exporting the bakeries, so they're all the specific requirements. So we have had this table on the everyday consumptions of the needed elements, so you can also use that just to adapt it to Ukrainian reality. And a couple of other things, that's what you cannot do with the nutrition facts table. Well, first of all, you cannot use any kind of different fonts. It's going to have to be the very same font. And like, for example, Arial or Helvetica, that's without, you cannot use any additional fonts or decorative fonts. It all has to be with like no sense. Then example number 2, you cannot use more than 2 fonts. Like, for example, you cannot provide one information with one font, so the other information in other font. And then example number 3, you cannot do the so-called saturation of the information. It also influences the way it's going to be readable for the consumer. So basically, you cannot do that also. So there were examples of how you should not do. So at example number 1, you can see that there is a specific component that is outlined, so you cannot pay additional attention to this element. On the example number 2, you can see that you cannot change the size of the font in order to draw the consumer's attention to the specific component in this table of content. And at the example number 3, you can see that you cannot use italic for the text. So it also might be considered the misleading of the customer. And you cannot use the very big shading, the gray. There's only 5% of gray of shading that you can use. And there's example that you can see in light gray that was wrong because the level of gradient was more than 5%, and also you cannot use black as the background font. So this is a very demonstrative example. Maria cookies that is also traded into Canada. Well, you can see how it's been done for Ukrainian packaging and how it's been done for Canadian packaging. You can see the differences between that. Just pay attention to that. That's very important because once again, there's all of the requirements that are very detailed, and it's important for you to read it out. So you have to just read it out, follow it step by step. So there will be nothing bad about that. I have a little bit of time, so I don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to skip a couple of slides. So I'm not going to be abusing the time that I have. I know that you will have all of this information available. Why? Because I really would like to draw your attention to that, because in Canada there's more than around 3,000 cases of calling out the products of the provisions and the call-outs of the product. The trigger for the provision to be started can be even a post in the social media. Like someone can just, post it out that that something was wrong, and that would be the trigger for the Canadian Food Quality Services to start the investigation. What is also very important, all of the services when calling out the products, there's 10%, the 10% of 3,000 provisions. So once again, this is so if something like this is going to be happening, then the title of the product and the title of the company will be published. Like, for example, the example with the allergens. This is an example of the recall of the project because they had the wrong labeling of the allergens in the goods. So slightly about the tools that we have, just the 2 minutes, because I know that I've already had to start and now the speaker has to start their presentation. But there's very important databases that are free of charge available online for you to get the most important market research, preliminary market research for your goods. First of all, as a Canadian importer database, and we were really shocked that this database didn't work for some period of time. Right now it works. Based on the code of your good, the system can generate the lists of the specific companies that work in this field with their addresses over there. Then there's also the Directories of Canadian companies. This is the resource that will help you to digitalize the information that you will find in the Canadian Importance Database. Like, for example, there is an example right here. Like, for example, on the left, you can see the first picture. That was the title of the companies that are working in this sphere that can be generated in the Canadian Importers Database. Then you go to the right, and you can see that in the Canadian Business Registers, you can find a more detailed information on what the company is doing. For example, we have chosen this specific company. You can see that the company is acting, that it's registered, it's working. And later on, if you will then click on this active link on the search for federal registration, you will see the address of this company, and you will be able to find the information on the person who is the head of this company, who is director of this company. And please do not forget the LinkedIn resource. It's very important for Canada, because as far as we are using the Facebook, for example, for our business activities, sometimes they're using LinkedIn in Canada. I have an acquaintance, I have a friend of mine, when he's participating in some of the conference, then he only posts his presentation in LinkedIn, but on Facebook he posts, like, for example, some photos from his social life. So there's a very clear difference between your business activities and your personal space. So please do not forget, if you would like to work with Canada, you have to have a really good LinkedIn account for your company and for yourself, for your employees, because potentially there is a lot of opportunities that they will be contacted through LinkedIn in Canada. So with this slide, you can see that what you can do with the public available resources, how you can find the specific contacts of specific people, so that you will already have the first preliminary communication. And trade data online, this is basically, you see the export and import statistics, and here this systems gives you the information to receive information based on products and on the specific industry of your interest. When we're speaking about the specific product, then you can play around, you can take a look at the export and import data and the volume of it for in Canadian dollars, American dollars, in the time scope, for example, year or 10 years. So it will give you a better understanding and a bigger picture of it. If you will search by industry, then you have to just upload the list of all of the industries that you have in Canada. The system will ask you to mark the one that corresponds to your interests, and you'll be able to choose those specific spheres that you're interested in. And the system will give you the opportunity to receive the aggregated data and will help you the opportunity to receive everything separately. As I saw that we'll not be able to cover the question on COVID-19 impact, but you can read it out through presentation. And if you'll have any questions or clarifications, you can see my contact at the end. I'll be always happy to answer the questions that you have that are in the sphere of my competence. Thank you very much. I am wrapping up with that. I do hope that I'm not actually have taken lots of your time, though. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you very much for that. We almost got into the timing that was given to us. So, dear participants, if you have any questions to Alexandra, please write down into chat. We can give you a couple of minutes for that. But before that, I would like to remind all of the people who have just joined us in our webinar, please rename yourself, so we would know who we have. Rename your profile, write down your name and the name of your enterprise. If you don't know how to do that, then there is the list of participants, the button participants. You can choose yourself, push the more button and rename. So you can do just the same with on your phone. If you will press the very same three buttons, there is the three dots over there, and you can do the rename for yourself, so that we would see all of the people who are now present in our meeting. Do we have any questions?
Наш канадський експерт вже до нас приєднався, і скоро має бути презентація, тому ми можемо питання в кінці.
Yeah, I think that we can continue. We can do the questions in the end, and you can see my contacts in the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, then I will gladly cover it further on in writing. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to invite Zoya Pavlenko, the expert on the environmental protection of the CUTIS project, who's going to give you an update of the CUTIS work in organic sector. So Zoya, please, the floor is yours. Good day, dear participants. I do hope that you can see my presentation now. Yes, we can see a presentation. I would like to get slightly in depth of the questions of the organic goods and their exports to Canada. As you can see already that I am the expert on working with environmental issues in the project, in the CUTIS project, and it's quite clear why I'm going to be speaking about the organic products. Well, first of all, like to start with, I guess that's we already mentioned that organic products it tastes well, and it's we all want to have it on our tables. But I would like to say that the main importance and the value of the organic goods it's about the way they're produced. It's the value of the production. It means that the agricultural production and the technologies that are being used to produce the goods that are more safe for the environment compared to other technologies. And that is one of the main and the biggest values of the organic goods for me as a person who works in the environmental sphere. But if we will speak about the most recent context of our economical collaborations in the world, then ecological and environmental initiatives and priorities that have been voiced out by the most countries of the world in the context of fighting the economical crisis, there is the big emphasis on organic products and on its environmental safety component. It's very important now. I would like to say that from the very beginning of the CUTIS project, my colleagues and I, we have understood that our agricultural practices from this sector, from the organic sector, they're very active. There are a lot of questions about the organic products to be exported into Canada. And we have understood that there are perspectives for that, and they started to read out more in that direction. That is why in 2018, we have had a very thorough research in this topic, and we have presented these publications that you can find for free at the link that is also offered about how to export to Canada. We have used the data of the two, well, on the organizations, on the Canadian Organic Trade Associations, and we've also used the information from their representatives. By the way, we're going to have her today in a presentation. She's going to present additional materials today, but we've also used the data of the annual reports of the World of Organic Agriculture. We have used it in our Ukrainian environment. We have adapted it to our Ukrainian conditions. We provided some recommendations and visions on the perspective of exporting the specific goods and products to Canada. So you can get it more details about this report on the link that have been provided to you, but I'm going to be mostly telling you some of the most important aspects out of those publications. The two important things is, first of all, the overview of the Canadian market, the statistics of consumption of organic goods in Canada, the portrait of the typical consumer, and the second part was there was the standards of the organic production of Canada, the standards that are applicable for the Canadian market. And I'm really grateful to the Organic Standards Associations and I'm really grateful for our organic organizations that really helped us in translating the specific norms of Canadian legislations. If we speak about the prospects of the Canadian organic market, if we say, yes, it has a lot of prospects, there is a lot of perspective in there. It's very, well, thinking about exporting organic products is very good because the market is quite big. It's number 6 for all of the world international markets. And what is interesting, the volumes of the organic markets in Canada is bigger than the separate organic markets of the European countries. I mean, like the European countries that are more already known for the Ukrainian organic producers. Moreover, in our publications, in our handbook, we have also provided the data on what are the organic goods that are the most popular among Canadians. And if we speak from like we know that there is a lot of things, a lot of products that you can do from the raw materials, from organic raw materials. You can do the feedings for the cattle, you can do wines, you can do foods. But it's most important thing that the organic foods and drinks, there are the most popular category of the organic products in Canada. There is around like um, there's there's the biggest category out of it. Out of these categories, what you can see that the most requested organic goods were the fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy, eggs, bread, and cereals. I do believe that using this data, using these figures, that Ukrainian organic market operators, they should consider their own impact and they should coordinate their actions to the Canadian market. What is also interesting that Canada is import oriented. When we're speaking about the organic goods, the overall value volume of import is about the export. So Canada is following the statistics of both import and exports on the border, not for all of the categories, only for 21 categories that is imported, import for 17 categories. And based on these figures, based on this data, and we have provided that some of the, you can see some of the exemptions from the imports to Canada. Based on this table, you might be slightly disappointed if we can see about the Ukraine, say about the Ukrainian exports. So you can see those mostly the fresh vegetables and fruits, coffee. So something that, because of the logistics reasons, cannot be traded from Ukraine to Canada. That disappoints us slightly, but once again, keep in mind that the organic import is not closely followed by all of the categories. So these are only the 17 categories that have been chosen. So if to speak about the main subject of our webinar, I would like to tell you maybe your goods are outside of those tracked categories. Also, I would like to add up that in 2017, that has been a very interesting experience in our project. We have organized the educational trip to Canada, and we had the representatives of Ukrainian food services, and we also joined them because it would be very interesting for us to know what will be with the further on regulations. And I would like to say that it's not that it's our main benefit for the markets to have the organic certificate. The organic products, the organic foods products, they are applying all the very same regulational norms as all of the other goods have. And what was also important for us to understand during this trip is that if we're speaking about the categories of, for example, the meat goods, then they also use the veterinary certificates. So at that very moment, based on 2017, we have understood it's that's only for the chicken meat, there's the veterinary certificates, they are currently being on the agreement stage. I have updated what is the situation right now. Maybe the situation is slightly changed, but for the other meat categories, for example, then we don't have the mutual recognition of the certificates. What was also interesting for us to find out that based on the database on the heirs data, there is the prohibition on, for example, importing the cereals and wheat from Ukraine, the seeding wheat. There was very interesting regulations on the dairy products. The thing is that in Canada, there is the so-called supply management system, one that is applied for dairy products, which means that the regulation bodies, they are following, they are tracking the statistics of consumptions of the dairy product in Canada. And on the other hand, they're providing additional quotas for the local farmers to produce the milk. So they're buying as much milk as they produced. And then the farmers cannot produce more. That is why they would like to regulate the production and to balance the regulation and consumption of the dairy products. And so the lack of the product, this is going to be covered by the imports. And I do believe that both organic or non-organic producers of the dairy products, it would be quite hard to get into Canadian market. Moreover, additional regulational limitations you can learn about by following this link. Thus, understanding all of the statistics that we have tracked, understanding the logistics aspect, the regulational limitations that we have, we wanted just to sum up that maybe that the most prospective goods to be exported to Canada, those are already processed goods like organic jams, organic drinks and beverages, or spirits or alcohols like wines. So on one hand, like sauces, additional. So on one hand, it's more real because there are less regulational barriers that will be used to that. On the other hand, then the exporting already the produced goods will give you a better commission. So it will you a better marginal, better commission for the Ukrainian producers, which will be much better for the economy. Very briefly, I would like to speak about the regulations of the organic sector in Canada. I know that Tia is going to be giving you a bit better outlook of this topic, but I will only give you the overall assumption that in Canada there are some specific regulational acts in the sector. In Canada, you cannot just say that you're organic. You cannot just draw yourself like some kind of green circle over there and you can sell it. Like, no, that doesn't work in Canada like that. All the goods that are going to be sold in Canada, organic goods, have to be certified. There are the local organic regime that is called Canada Organic Regime. And you can see the labeling, you can see the mark on the slide. And in order to receive the right to use this labeling at your product, then the company should be certified. So once again, not certified by anybody, but only by the accredited certifying body that has to be once again certified by the Canada Organic Agency. So all the other stages of the organic production, like there is the list on the site of the main accredited certifier, there is the list of all of those producers, and I can tell you that currently right now we have the organic standards. I would like to comment it in a very briefly way. I have find another certification body over there. I don't know if you can, I don't know whether the Ukrainian producers can, like, for example, go through Canadian certification in India, but this is reality. But for the organic goods, you are being, like, for example, imported from Ukraine to Canada. If we speak, for example, about those activities that have been done by our project as supporting the organic export to Canada, then we have offered a very nice practice. It's not something that we came up for. We are kind of seen that being done before. We have provided that, like, we provide you the discount of 50%. We actually pay 50% of the Canadian certification for Ukrainian organic producers who addressed us, who have seen this opportunity, who have paid attention to this opportunity. And I'm going to be speaking more about them later on. And we have also helped them to create informational materials, videos, articles, promotional materials, so that they share their achievements in export from Ukraine to Canada of organic goods. They have also given us the motivations of why they were motivated to have the Canadian organic certifications, what were their main benefits in this direction. And also we have been working with that, where the enterprise that is called agroecology in Poltava region, and you can take a look at the video that they have provided with us with really broad comments. We have also worked with the Skvira combinat of the bread products. They've also had video, and we have the Arnica group. And I know that have been registering to our webinar. It was a really big pleasure for us to collaborate with them. I was really surprised by their request because. By the way, I'm sorry, but it's already almost the time for us to stop. Yes, I am. This is basically my final slide. If you have any questions, then I will gladly cover them. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Zoya. I do believe that we will then get the questions in the end for the Q&A session, and we would like to turn the floor to our next speaker. But before we do that, I would like to remind you that we're going to have this simultaneous interpretation right now. So please, right now, at the tool panel, choose the language that you would like to listen to. If you would like to listening to Ukrainian translation, you please choose Russian. If you would like to listen to the English original, please do choose English. So we would like to pass the floor to our next speaker, and I would like to pass the floor to the Executive Director of the Association of Canada Organic Treat Association. Please welcome Tia Loftsgaard, who will tell us more about the peculiarities of certifying the organic products in Canada. Tia, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be speaking to you. I guess it's my morning and your afternoon. We're based here in Ottawa, the nation's capital, and I'm going to be presenting to you this morning some opportunities and some knowledge about the Canadian organic market. We just got a great overview, but I think I'll be able to spell out a few more, and we will take all the questions at the end of the presentation. And I'm glad that I listened to the last one because it made me think about some of the logistics of exporting and what you would need to know for organic certification. So I'll add that in at the end of the presentation. So let's just go for, essentially what is organic? Organic is, of course, it's a movement. And we talk a lot about the environmental components of organic, but essentially these are the principles in which the production is happening. So we've got the principle of health, of ecology, of fairness, and of care. And as we, of course, have changed and evolved and grown the system, the system's been around. This was the original system of agriculture, and it wasn't until the 1950s that we started seeing different pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers come into agricultural production. But simply in the 1970s, it was important for us to codify what this movement meant and what were the standards that would actually bring it into being. And, people might find that this is interesting to see that there's a principle of fairness, but I think you'll see that it is important for us to think about the people who are producing the food, the animals that are under production as well. So it's something that hasn't seemed to go into the codification and the regulations, but it is something that we are discussing in Canada as an important part, that we want it to be sustainable and fair to the farmers who are actually growing the food. So a little bit more in regards to organic production. It is a holistic system, optimized productivity of different communities in the agro-ecosystem, including soil, plants, livestock, and people. So there again, capturing, it's not just about the land, it's not just about the air, it's not just about the pollinators, it is not just about the end product. And I think that's an important thing. We are certifying the product end to end from the production system to the final product with full traceability in regards to the handling of these products. But it is a system intentionally created for us to be able to be holistic and to understand the full scope of production. Of course, the principal goal of it is to develop operations that are sustainable and harmonious with the environment, and that will have agricultural production around for the long term, which is important for, not only the ecosystem, but also for ourselves in having sustainable futures for our children. So the very first organic standards that were developed on an international scale was with IFOAM. IFOAM is an acronym, and if you're going to be working in organic, you should probably get to know it. It stands for the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movement. And this was basically the global community coming together. I call it the United Nations of Organic, essentially, where we all came together as different countries that were working in organic and compared our standards and tried to come up with some global norms. And so that very first organic standard came out in 1972. From there, different regions and territories went ahead in codifying and creating regulations in their territories. So in 1999, you saw that the European Union was the first major region to create their organic standards, followed by the United States in 2002. And our organic standards process actually took quite some time. It was very much a process where the European Union and Japan were indicating that, you know, Canada does a lot of production and export, and it was important for us to codify what organic meant. When I first started working in this movement in the 1990s, we had over 70 organic labels, which represented 70 organic standards. So you can imagine the consumer confusion and the difficulty that created in the marketplace. So it was in 2009 that this logo, which is the Canada Organic Regime logo, finally came into implementation. And I'm just going to give you a little bit more in regards to that so that you understand that when you create a standard, it's not a static process. It is something that continually needs to change and evolve and deal with new technologies that are coming into being, especially in the biotech sphere, so that we continue to keep things updated and relevant. So our very first original standard was in 2006, but it took, of course, time for us to educate the society here in Canada and globally for any of the imported products that were coming into our region, for them to understand what are our agreed upon standards in Canada. So it was in 2006 that we published the first version, and that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which is our regulator in Canada, they created the Canada Organic Regime. So if you ever hear people talk about CORE, that is our organic program in Canada. It not only includes the standards, but it also includes the certifiers, it includes the regulators, and it includes you know, the auditors. It's the entire system is the Canada Organic Regime. And so in 2009, in July, I believe it was actually just the end of June, in 2009, our regulators started enforcing. So anybody who used to be able to say the word organic on a product, or even, you know, use an old logo, they no longer could do that. So they would start enforcing the standard, and that would come with penalties in regards to misleading claims and, you know, all those things that an enforcement agency would do to make sure that anybody who was saying organic actually was fully certified by one of the designated accredited certification bodies. And that's the section I want to go into with you later, because it's important for you to know who is authorized to certify to the Canadian standards, especially globally. Then, of course, we revised the standards in 2011, and we revised the standards again in 2015. And we've been in the process of revising our standards. So we've been in the process for the last, I'd say, 2 years, which is very much an interesting process. It's industry-led, but with the Canadian government's regulations and standards in place. So industry votes and proposes, and even consumers, everybody can participate in our standards development process. But essentially there is about maybe 20 organizations that are representative of the organic sector that does the final technical vote. So in this way, it's very different than the United States. If any of you sell into the United States, the final vote is by the government. In Canada, the final vote is by the industry. But we follow all of the regulations and guidelines that you need to follow in order to create a law. So to make that point, organic in Canada is a law. It is governed by the Same Food for Canadians Act, and it is something that you know, has been working very well in order to improve enforcement and to improve trust and understanding of what is the Canadian organic standards. So the process we're in right now, in 2020, we will be publishing our final version, and we will give the industry, including exporters, importers, time, 1 year in time for them to understand what those changes are, make the changes to their operation, and then go ahead and start shipping their products. As of November 2021, they will need to have adhered to that, or their products could be stopped and said, this doesn't qualify for organic in Canada. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of questions on, well, what are the changes that are coming? My suggestion, and this is an offer, is once those actual final version, we will be doing a different series of webinars for different stakeholder groups to help educate. So I'd be happy to present again on what those changes are, because that's a whole presentation in itself. So I will move to the next slide. Our regulations in Canada do not actually pertain to all products. And it is something that as a trade association that we would like to change. But right now, because our regulation lives under the Safe Food for Canadians regulation, we are limited to food, feed, and seed. And what's interesting is when the new Safe Food for Canadians regulation was published in January of last year, of course, they give us a year to allow to start to implement again, but it actually opened it up for one product category that was not included because of the way that the regulation was set up. And now we are allowed to certify seafood. So if any of your businesses are oriented around seafood, that is wonderful, and that we would be more open to having that as a certified organic product, certified to the Canadian Organic Standards, and that will be enforced as of January 2021. So our product categories right now that fall outside the scope of the organic regulation that could not use this logo are textiles, cosmetics, body care, supplements, vitamins, natural health care products. So, you know, over time, we will continue to push to have these product categories covered, because it's important, we think, for organic to mean the same thing against all product categories. But for now, food, feed, and seed is what's covered. And when I say food, feed, and seed, that also includes beverages, just to be clear. So what are just the high level areas, of course, that are the components of what is the organic standards? I would say that we're very much following what the iPhone standards are, the global ones, as well as Codex. But of course, there's nuances, of course, in every country's standards, but essentially, you know, grown without synthetic pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fertilizers, grown without synthetic growth hormones or antibiotics when it comes to livestock, grown under humane animal conditions and access grass-fed, access to the outdoors, grown without fossil fuel fertilizers or sewage sludge, grown without GMOs or genetically engineered organisms. This is one of the areas that we're really tightening up the standards because there's so much new technologies coming out so quickly in the 2020 version. Of course, on the food production side of things, there's a lot where we're not allowed to have artificial preservatives, colors, flavors, chemical additives, no MSG, no aspartame, no sodium nitrates. And again, the packaging, even if you've got a product that maybe was an eco package created from like sugarcane or corn, that packaging, if it was created with GE products such as soy, corn, or beet sugar, that also cannot be used. So there's obviously a lot more detail than this, but high level, that's kind of the main components that, that we message about. And this trademark is what you are allowed to put on products once you're certified. So it is a product certification seal. It is owned and trademarked by the Canadian government, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And in order to use this product, you would have to get it from a certified, a certification body that has granted you a certificate saying that you are compliant to the standards. So just to go into some of the high-level demands, it was mentioned that, of course, we are one of the largest markets in the world. If you combine Canada and the United States, that is 50% of all organic demand in the world. So we're in a pretty important market. And of Canadians that are purchasing organic weekly, 66% of our population is actually buying it on a weekly basis. So you might think, oh, it might just be occasional, etc., especially, you know, with with the pandemic happening, I've got a slide at the end, which I'd be happy to show you in the Q&A session, which shows that organic consumption continues to grow despite price challenges or people losing their jobs. So it's fascinating to see that when people have committed to organic, it's a values choice, and they might look for cheaper options through private label products or buying more in bulk, but they won't switch off of eating organic, because, especially in a pandemic, because it's a healthier lifestyle choice for people who are trying to boost up their immune system. So just to go into our updated 2020 statistics, we have a total organic market, this is just for food and beverages, of 6.38 billion Canadian dollars. And we do have a growth rate of 8.7%. So now we're at 3.2% of the overall market share of all of the food and beverage market. So it's growing like crazy. And of course, we can't keep up, which is why we rely on imports. And we are very much an import dependent nation. It's important for us to have relationships with organizations like yourself and with a lot of importers, because we are heavily dependent on bringing in products year round. Of course, we're very seasonal with our practically 6 months of winter here in Canada. So it's important aspect for us to have international trade happening. You can see here the updated statistics. This is the most up-to-date. Our association writes in this chapter for the global publication, and it is important for us to do these statistics on an annual basis and try and measure how are we growing compared to our competitors. We were always fourth. 3 years ago, we were fourth largest. China surpassed us. I would assume that's mostly due to population growth. But Italy knocked us down to the 6th place last year. So it's interesting to see how it continues to grow in other regions as well. But still, just to highlight that, if you're going to be exporting, Canada not only is a gateway to the United States, you could also export to the United States, and it comes up here. We have so much cross-border trade flow happening between our two countries. And that will bring me to why we have a special trade relationship with the United States. Now, I think it's important for you to know how many operators we have working in organic in Canada. We have 7,000 certified operators. You can see that we grew almost by 1,000 since 2017. These are the most up-to-date statistics. We're right now tallying the 2019 statistics. Of course, we had to wait till the end of 2019, but you can see that more and more operators are getting involved in growing organic, but we do not have a federal program that helps subsidize farmers to go certified organic. I did learn through the earlier speaker that it looks like there is a subsidization program available for Ukrainian operators. So you definitely have an advantage over any certified operator in Canada to be able to offset some of those certification fees. Just to kind of look high level, we've been growing year over year. But that was a big jump in the last year. So I think people are starting to realize not only is organic good because I get a premium, it is good because it's better for the environment, and I'm starting to think about my carbon and carbon offsets and all the other components of having positive soil for the long term. That's if you work in, farm operations. But even when it comes to, animal husbandry, we're seeing, better meat quality, etc. So this is our overall operations, including processors. Now, just to go just to the farmer level, we've got 5,791, and you can see that that was a 21% growth. And I think you'll be quite interested to see, it was very static for quite a few years where we were more like 3,000, and then it just started kind of creeping up quite a bit in the last little while. So now we have about 3.3 million acres as certified organic in our country. It is very challenging to grab these statistics. We're working through the process right now, and the data collection by the certification bodies is quite challenging, but if I could say anything, this number is low compared to the messy data that we get, and this is the best number that we could summarize. And I thought it would be interesting just to highlight, you know, how big we are compared to Ukraine, yet there's still such an opportunity for your country. So you can see that we produce a lot more, but we take ours and we grow a lot of raw commodities and we export them. So we tend to be very much an export nation. We grow a lot of raw commodities through our organic production. You're seeing more of a local food movement start for vegetables, etc. But again, you know, you get one crop. Particularly this year, it's very challenging for people to even grow vegetables because of labor conditions, you know, transport issues, as well as farmers markets and local options for selling not being as available as they usually are. But I think it's I just want to highlight that, you know, it's amazing to see how much trade we've got going on with the Ukraine. Well, we really have a lot of land that could be produced here, but that's not our strategy. Our government has a export-focused agricultural mandate, and they want to achieve 85 billion in exports under their mandate. So just to highlight, just especially if you're looking at exporting to specific regions, just to kind of get a sense of where are our large organic production areas. You can see in Saskatchewan, that's the SK, that's in the center of the country. That's where we're growing most of the grains and cereals. British Columbia is our warmest region in this country, and so we're growing a lot more fruits and vegetables, less on the grain side. You know, there's a lot of mountains happening there. Quebec is very well supported. That's on our eastern seaboard, and the government of Quebec, which is a unique relationship with our federal government. They do a lot of organic support programs, and I would say they are one of the most diverse on not only exporting, but also suiting local markets. Just to kind of look at what we're growing here, we've got 35% field crops, and you can see a heck of a lot of our land is actually just left fallow. So it's for forage, it's for green manure, and very little fruit and nut, vegetable and root crops. So, you know, these field crops that I mentioned are very much about export. So I've been, you know, getting a lot of calls through the pandemic, and people are like, well, we're not able to get our shipments in from XYZ country, which are very much field crop based. And it's just interesting that they're not sourcing locally. So there's certainly an opportunity for your exports. You're going to get a copy of this presentation. So if this is of interest, you can see sort of the breakdown by province and what's growing where. I think it's more important for us to spend time on our organic equivalency arrangements. So an organic equivalency arrangement is simply a recognition of each other's standards and a trust between our two countries that your regulator is going to do enforcement at a local level, and so will we. So we trust each other's governments to run a good organic program and do proper enforcement. And so we have organic arrangements with the United States, the EU, Switzerland, Japan, and Costa Rica. We are currently working on an expansion of the Japan livestock standard, and we are currently working on an arrangement with Taiwan and Mexico. So those are you know, an important factor in regards to trade. And I want to specifically call out the United States. Their program is called the National Organic Program. And, you know, as we have such a strong trading relationship with them, we have a unique agreement with them that we will recognize each other's standards no matter where it's grown in the world. So if you are certified to the Canadian organic regime in the Ukraine, you could sell into the United States as long as you are adhering to our agreement. And we have a few items that are critical variances between our standards. So as long as you look at what those standards are and you follow that arrangement agreement, you could certify either to the Canadian regime or you could certify to the US regime, and reciprocally, any of you can sell to Canada or the United States and use either logo. So That's an important bilateral equivalency arrangement that we've had in place since our 2009 standards started. And it's pretty important, I think, for us to maintain this because we want for operators to not have to fly somebody over from Canada to be able to certify, which is what we used to have to do before we had these equivalencies. So I think, you know, we just hosted the international delegation of all the countries that we're doing reciprocal agreements with in December, and we can see that there's much more coordination at a global level. The big thing that has been agreed upon by all the countries, we're going to be working on mitigating fraud. We're going to look at improved data and how we can have more transparency on international trade moving forward. So some of the things that are being put in place in regards to the Canada and US agreement is that we'll be monitoring everything that comes in from the United States. With their organic certificate, it needs to actually say that they're compliant to the Canadian standards. And if that is not written on the organic certificate, which could be for your products, if you're certifying to the NOP, then it will get stopped at the border. And that just went into place April 30th of this year. So there's a much higher level of rigor on what's going to be coming into our country. The other new project that started last year, and we're in the final phase of completion, is through the AIRS system, which is the Automatic Import Registry System. They are now creating unique codes for all organic products coming into our country to monitor compliance to our standards. So all these things are not only in order to mitigate fraud, but it's also, of course, to have better data and oversight over the organic system of products that are produced in other countries. So I just wanted to point out a couple different reports that are available. I know they're not in Ukrainian, but I think it's something that if you're interested, you might want to take a peek at. We do specific grain reports for the 3 prairie provinces that are very heavily growing grains. And so if you wanted to get a sense of what's grown in Canada and what might be a unique opportunity, I know I have a lot of people coming to me. Hemp is huge. I don't know if you're allowed to grow hemp in your country, but it's one of the big, exciting new crops that everybody's looking for these days. And just to highlight that processors are looking for all sorts of different ingredients. So we have started monitoring how many processors we have in our country. So we have 1,719, and those are manufacturers and even retailers. So you're starting to see some of the big guys, like Loblaw is one of our largest retailers. They're doing a lot of private label through their PC Organic brand. And you've got people like Costco that are with their Kirkland brand. And these two are leaders on organic, and it's all through private label. So there's a lot of processors that are behind that supply chain in many, many, many different countries, and could be some opportunities there. So you can see we're pretty static. In fact, we even saw a bit of a drop in regards to how many processors we have in our country. So that's something that our Canadian government is looking at on how we can support manufacturers better, especially in rural areas, so that we could do more production at a local level. But we're seeing a high concentration of processors in around Toronto or Vancouver, Montreal, the major hubs. And just to say that we've now published the very first organic food processing report ever released in Canada. And we did the whole synopsis in 2018 and published in 2019, which is available on our Shopify store. And just to go a little bit further, we also just did a first food service study just to get a sense of how big is the food service market. So we, generally look at our statistics based on grocery store sales, but we actually have a lot happening at the food service level. So food is around 409 million out of the overall market, and we've got 26% of it is 146 million on beverages. So you can see that it's about 2% market share overall. And just to kind of break it down a little bit more, you can see fruits and vegetables really dominate the food category, but also proteins, breads, grains, pulses, and then you get into smaller categories like eggs, dairy, processed foods. So I would see that there'd be a huge opportunity sort of on the top 3 categories for export for Ukrainians. And then just to get into what Canadians are saying and why they're buying organic in Canada is, of course, to avoid highly processed foods and artificial ingredients. 49% of them say that this is why. Also, they believe that organic are something that's healthy for their body. And then kind of the secondary part, I hope my internet is okay. My thing just said that my internet went off. Organic food is better for the environment, of course. But then we get back to it's about me. I don't want to consume genetically modified food, and that they care about the farmers and that they're doing well and that this is supporting positive agriculture. So just to go into another study that we did, and I won't run through too much of it, but just leave it for you to peruse later. But you can see on a study we did just recently, a breakdown between like who's buying organic food and what are they buying mostly, and is there a gender preference. So you can see through this study that we did in December 2018 that, you know, fruits and vegetables is the highest category. That's always the case because it's the #1 place where people think about pesticide residues. But then it goes into more of the eggs, dairy, breads, less into meat. We don't have as much meat availability here as certified organic, but it's starting to grow. And then you get into more of the pulses, legumes, and beverages. Then to just break it down by generation, you can see that millennials and Gen Z are really leading the charge as the top consumers. So when we used to do studies, we would we didn't even have these generations around, and now we can really see that it's the future generation. So this tells me organic is here to stay. It is top preference by these age groups. And even though they might not make a lot of money, they definitely prioritize where they spend their money. A regional breakdown, if you want to get a sense of where there is demand highest on each one of the different product categories. Interestingly, we keep seeing some interesting statistics out of Alberta. When we looked at the overall, where's the top demographic buying, it was in Alberta, which is just beside British Columbia. So fascinating to kind of get a sense of where demand is high in what regions. And then the frequency, well, you know, you say they're buying organic, how often are they going to buy it? So you can see that, you know, it's kind of in the 50, and, you know, different product categories have different components, but, you know, when it comes to fruit and veg and grains, they're fairly consistent that they're in the 50% range. And then just to kind of get into the grains section, just because I know you guys produce quite a bit of grains, and just to kind of break it down a little bit more by age there for you. And then why are they buying breads, grains, and cereals? Well, again, we looked at it product category by product category. I just pulled out this slide in particular. But again, it's residues, it's GMOs, it's to reduce the use of synthetic and pesticide fertilizers. And then they feel like it tastes better. And then you get into the environmental stuff. So it's always about the consumer first, the environment further down the line. So I'm just about to wrap up here, but just to highlight that, you know, we try to measure awareness of the Canada Organic logo. If you will be selling into Canada as a finished product, I highly suggest that you use the Canada Organic logo. It is the most trusted logo. We've tested it against the National Organic Program logo, against other sustainability logos. It is one that, of course, is regulated by our federal government, and so it's very trusted. And we continue to monitor, you know, our sales growing. You can see just between 1 year, you know, it went from people 56% are buying weekly to 66%. Now, I haven't been able to test recently, but we're hoping to test again consumer preference. And just to get a sense, are we continuing to get up to like 80% now, or are we starting to plateau? So I think it'll be really interesting to get a sense. And I'll leave it there and just leave it open for questions now if you guys have any.
15 хвилин, тому, будь ласка, пишіть у чат.
Dear participants, we have 15 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please write the questions down into chat and we will read them out.
I'll put up our website as well, just so that everybody knows where you can have these resources available for you. So that's available on the screen there. And the other thing, and maybe I'll just say this proactively. So I decided to go and look what are the certification bodies available in the Ukraine that you could actually get certified to the Canadian Organic Standards. And on the CFIA website, they have the directory of all the certification bodies. So I can share these links as well, but there is no Canadian accredited certification bodies in the Ukraine. So that means you would have to either bring in a certifier from another country close by that is authorized to certify, or certify to the National Organic Program. And this is the list of certifiers that are authorized in Ukraine. So that's a nuance that I think is really important, because you don't want to go and get certified to your local standard when that's not something that's recognized here.
Дякую, Тіо. У нас є декілька запитань від Organic.
Thank you, Tia. We have a couple of questions from organic meat. First of all, how much time will it take? How much time will it take to receive certificates? So how much time will it take to get certified according to the Canadian standards?
So generally we would say 3 years, but it depends on the product category for meat. So there's very specific rules around gestation for different, animals, etc., and what you would need to do in order to ensure that they are adhering to the standards. So I'd be happy to follow up with this specific question in writing, because it's not 3 years clearly for an animal, but it's very specific to what you're growing. Is it a pig? Is it a cow? Is it a chicken? Etc. So, and just to highlight that that is the chicken standards in Canada are one of the most substantial changes that we're making in our 2020 standard revisions. So I'd be happy if you wanted to give me your email, and I'll follow up with you in writing, or through translators somehow.
Добре, дякуємо. Маємо ще декілька.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have a couple of more questions coming from, once again, the Organic Meats Company. So the first question that can be outlined out of this number of questions is snails. Can you export snails to Canada? Can you tell us something about that? Because you said the seafood, but the shellfood snails, can you export snails?
I believe snails would count. So we're going through this process right now of the CFIA determining which certification bodies are accredited. And so you would need to, again, look on this website that I have, and you'll see, I'll just give you an example. Actually, let me just go to, on this website, you would have to actually get certified by somebody. This is a certification body that talks about specialized production, right? They'd have to be covered for the aquaculture standard. So, and each one of those scopes by the different certification bodies, you'd have to look for the details of that. Now, I have talked to different companies that have said that because of the pandemic, there's been some delay with some of the certification bodies getting accredited, but I'd be certainly, I believe that snails are going to be a part of the scope of the aquaculture standard. Now, the National Organic Program does not have an aquaculture standard, though, so you could not get certified to the NOP in this situation. So you would have to get certified to the Canadian Organic Regime by a certifying body that is, you know, in that scope, which unfortunately sometimes can be expensive to bring them in. We are looking at wanting to do an EU equivalency on aquaculture, but that cannot be negotiated until 2021. But it's in our intention. And at that point, you could then get certified to the EU standard, you know, depending on what the equivalency and the critical variances might look like, and then you could export it to Canada. But it's a process because this is all new.
Дуже дякуємо. Є ще декілька питань.
Thank you very much for that. We have a couple of more questions. I think that we can combine those questions. The question is as follows. So once again, the very same organic meat. What you should start while exporting to Canada, how you should start your export to Canada, and what are the first steps that you would advise, and what budget you need to get prepared for the certification. So the first step in exporting to Canada, and how much money should you have for the certification?
Well, I believe, I'm not sure if CUTIS does do incoming buyer's missions, but I think that's the most fruitful way to make connections and or attend BioFoc. BioFoc is the world's largest organic trade show. We have a Canadian pavilion that we run there with a variety of exporters, importers, everybody coming together. So we do incoming buyer's missions ourselves through our trade association. So, you know, I think it's very much an important role for CUTIS to help with B2B matching, to find your interested buyers. And then from that point, you know, once you determine that you've got a market, then I would, of course, look into the cost benefit of finding a certification body, knowing what those costs are. Each certification body's fees are different, and it is a question of whether you would need to bring in somebody from another country, since you don't have anybody certified to the core, but you could use one of the NOP certifiers that I mentioned. You know, it's hard to give a sense of the cost because we don't know how large your operation is. We don't know if you do manufacturing in addition to raising the animals. These are all areas where there'd be an additional fee by the certification body. But, you know, I think the most important thing is to actually get a quote, start there so that you can build that in. Generally, I would say, you know, in Canadian dollars, I've seen it be $1,000, $2,000 to start off an operation, sometimes as low as $600 if you're a small operation for fruits and vegetables. And then when it comes to, of course, importing, in our country, you do not have to have a certified organic importer, so it does open up more opportunities. In Europe, you have to have a certified importer. So you really could sell to anybody here, big or small loads, which is, we think, beneficial in order to help facilitate more trade and not be locked into just working with one certified importer. But yeah, I think it's important for you to scope it out, and hopefully CUTIS has some resources to help understand, you know, what's the best ports, what's the best market, in order to bring products in. But like Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, those are your import destinations.
Я вибачаюся, якщо можна, я
I'm sorry. Yeah, I would like to also add up to the answer that Tia has said, because I know a little bit of Ukrainian reality. I would just to add up to that. Speaking from your question, so I would like to say that there's a question about the meat products. So it means that you have to also follow the sanitary certificates and veterinary certificate. And there is a question about whether it's harmonized between the countries, because right now, you know, the organic status is not the final answer to you for your products. And basically you have to have the sanitary and veterinary conclusions in place and certificates in place. It depends on the type of meat. There's going to be the different situation, but as far as I know, on the regulations body, there is only the now talks about only poultry, only chicken. Speaking on snails, there's a different type of certificate. There's also has to be the veterinary certificate because it's the living organisms as far as I know. And there has to be once again, the synchronization of the veterinary and acknowledgement, the certifications between the countries. Speaking on the prices, as long as I say, the accredited body, the certifying body for the exports, the organic standards, there is one body that is now mentioned in the Canada Food Inspection Agency, so you can use them. There is the address and the contacts. Their contacts, they are available in my presentation, so you can check them out, you can address them. In the practice, when we provide you the 50% of compensation for the certification, I would like to tell you that it costs around 30,000 hryvnias. I don't know, maybe it's going to be more expensive right now, but more or less like that. 30,000 hryvnias. Then again, you should not consider the certificate as will guarantee you will get whatever the reasons are. You have to be ready that on the different level of the organic practices, there are different requirements. Like, for example, for the plants, there is like 3 years of the transit period, then you will have to follow the specific standards to be certified. But the very first thing that you have to do is to open and read out the organic standards of Canada, adapt your production and manufacturing to that. And then if you will then go to the certified body, they will have an inspection to your production line and manufacturing line. If they're further on going to be corresponding to the standards, you might have the certificate. If it doesn't correspond or comply to the standards, you will pay your money, and they will say that unfortunately you will not get the certificate, and you will basically lose your money. So first of all, you have to know the standards well. You have to understand whether you are ready to be certified, whether you're ready to comply with the standards that are requested for Canadian certification. That's all from my side. Thank you very much. We have a couple of more questions. The first question I'm going to read in English. So, what are the biggest imported commodities in Canada?
What are the biggest imported commodities? That was a question?
Yes. Сировина, товари, commodities.
I'm suddenly having a hard time hearing you.
We have this question. У нас це питання є в чаті. What are the...
We have this question in the chat. You can just push the chat button and you can see that there is the question, what are the biggest commodities, organic commodities imported in Canada?
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we have a lot of coffee. We drink a lot of coffee. So a lot of coffee, a lot of tropical fruits, oils. We do bring in a lot of soy and corn, like a lot of feed for animals comes from other countries, I would say. What else? Sugar. Sugar's huge. I wouldn't say there's a heck of a lot of wheat. We are leaders, like we produce so much wheat and oats ourselves, but sometimes, you know, it comes to semi-processed products that are needed as an ingredient in something. Yeah, I would say like it's mostly on sort of the tropical side that we're seeing most of our imports. A lot of finished goods as well. Chocolate is huge. You know, we do grow a lot of chickpeas and pulses, etc., but I think we also import quite a bit. So I wish I had all the statistics, as mentioned by Zoya, that there are not great statistics. There's very limited codes for us to be able to evaluate. We only have 65 codes, and most of those are all fruits and vegetables. So I have good insights into the volumes coming in on certain product categories and terrible oversight on other product categories. So it's something we've been working with the Canadian government to improve, and we will have better statistics, I'd say, by next year, because they did start that new import code registry. So hopefully we will have values and volumes for every single product category coming into the country after a year has passed, and we've got some good data.
Дуже вам дякуємо. Маємо ще...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We also have a very detailed question. There is the Smyrna company. They say, if we are growing beans, and for example, if we are growing the navy beans without using any chemical substances, whether this product will be interesting for Canadian market, or this product should be processed and only then exported.
Yeah, so you know, just to reiterate that what Zoya said, it's not just about the absence of growing with a pesticide. You do have to follow the standards. I've got them up on the screen right now. This is the standard you would follow for growing navy beans, the general principles and management standards. It is not only about growing it, but it's also about how you preserve the integrity of the product through shipping, through processing, manufacturing facilities. And this is the permitted substance list about what natural, I'll say, natural fertilizers and pesticides, etc., are permitted through the growing process. So if you adhere to these two standards, you can get the certification. And I would believe, yes, navy beans is not something that I see grown in Canada a lot. I believe that we import most of them.
Дякую. У нас було ще одне питання, але, здається, на нього вже...
Thank you very much. We have one more question, but I do believe that you already answered this question. I think that we're out of time already. So I do believe if we have no new questions, then I think that we can finalize our webinar. Thank you very much, Tia, for your presentation. Thank you very much for covering the questions for us.
Great. Thank you very much.
And thus, dear participants, if we have no questions left, I would like to invite you tomorrow, 11 o'clock in the morning. Please join us for our second webinar. We have already sent you the links for you to join the webinar, but once again, we're going to copy to duplicate the very same links for you to join us. Tomorrow, we're going to be speaking about the export promoting office tools. You will learn of how to analyze new markets, of how to search for the international partnerships, and it will be also dealing not with the Canadian market, but you will be dealing with all of the markets all over the world. So that is why it will be very interesting. I would like to thank all of our today's speakers. I would like to thank all of our participants. Thank you very much for your participations and questions. And I would like to wish all of us to have a good day and good evening, and I'll be waiting for you tomorrow. Have a nice day. Bye.